commuters and our year-round friends. And we're happy to see our friend Valerie from our community television station, FCTV, which is Pages, a local broadcast. Now, a special guest this evening is author Archer Mayer. He's come all the way down south from Vermont to be with us this evening to talk about his perennially popular mystery series featuring Detective Joe Dunbar. We also hope he'll tell us about his real life as a criminal investigator in Vermont. We all have questions to ask Archer about how he develops his character, where his ideas come from. And so without further ado, let's welcome Archer Mayer. But before we welcome him, I just want to tell you, Carol, our bookseller, is very sorry that her shipment of 3 to Keep a Secret did not arrive in time. But she'll have them soon, along with the newest book, Proof Positive, which is coming out, I believe, next month. So even though, and I have to tell you, even though we have 3 copies of 3 to Keep a Secret, I haven't even had a chance to get it yet because it's such a hot book. So you may want to get one from Carol when they arrive here. So let's welcome Archer Mayer.
So rumor has it each one of you was paid $20 to be here, which is pretty impressive. So obviously things are doing very well in Falmouth. Thank you for coming. I know you were expecting someone else, but too bad. We'll make that work. Haven't seen these in a long time. Bumper stickers, they're free, by the way. So I'm supposed to hold this up. I'm under orders to do a variety of things, and one is my wife, who's the brains of the operation. So if there are any malfunctions with management, that's where you go. I'm just the talent. This is the one that was delightfully advertised moments ago, so that's coming out in hardback, and it's number 25. Yes, I haven't come up with any new idea, so I just keep writing the same series year after year after year. In fact, I had some of my more carnivorous colleagues, say that 3 times fast, come up to me and suggest, good Lord, no wonder you're driving a used secondhand truck. You need to do thrillers, and you need to, have bodice rippers, and you need to do this, you need to do that, and it occurred to me that I must be communicating with actually one of the few certified morons in the writing business. Because the intimation was that you do this for money, which is insane. I mean, for one thing, you do it 7 days a week all year long, and you better turn out a book a year because it's your income if you actually try to make a living at it like I do. So why would you be so cynical or so detached from your deep inner workings that you would write anything for a marketplace? I mean, for one thing, it doesn't exist, but also it just means that you're writing against all the stuff that's inside your head, all the things that you acquired over the years of living life and watching people sort their hash out, usually inappropriately, and then having it reflect in what amounts to social anthropology, because that's what basically these things are. I actually don't read murder mysteries because I don't like most of them. But I like the ones that do talk about people figuring out not who done it, but why they did what they did, how they did them. And that's, of course, what eventually got me, just to get autobiographical in a moment. You'll notice I'm a free flow kind of guy. That's the way I write, too, as a matter of fact. Chaos theory is that I wanted to be a writer in 1975 and began what I call my first exercise in typing. This is because it was mercifully never published. Of course, at the time, I loved it. And I sent it off to a New York editor, actually an agent, who had the good taste and good manners to respond by saying, "You have a nice voice," Made me feel like, that ugly girl at the prom. And he said, but this is possibly the worst book I've ever read. But he said I had a nice voice. That's all I wanted to hear, because at the time I was actually an editor at a scholarly publishing house in Texas, University of Texas Press. And so I took that as encouragement rather than the opposite. And I wrote another exercise in typing, which I think was minutely better than its predecessor. Delusion is key in this business, by the way. And so it went for 5, 6 full-length novels and a few things that even I couldn't finish because they were so horrible. And then in 1980, I moved up to Vermont and began to do this full-time. First of all, I did history books, though, for about 1988. So from 80 to 88, I was doing what, brace yourselves now, I was trained to do in college. Now, how many of you can claim that, huh? So I was actually trained in history, and I was a practicing historian. Not as a teacher either, but just writing this stuff. So that was great fun. It got me out across the United States. It also trained me in my craft, how to put all these words in an organized way on paper. Also taught me how to hunt and peck as a typist, because this was pre-computers. But anyhow, in 1988, I had about 3 books come out, a couple of history books, and the first Joe Gunther, which was called Open Season, a title I hated because the publisher said that the title I came up with is conflict with another book and blah, blah, blah. And so we went back and forth, and he finally chose one out of whole cloth, which is why I've always sort of divorced or distanced myself from that title. But anyhow, that's neither here nor there. And we began a sort of yearly cyclical habit, because I wanted to get away from histories and get into these, because I'm applying the same technique. I go out, I conduct interviews, I research, I poke my nose where it doesn't belong, I don't get shot at or thrown out most of the time, and when I retreat, I have way more information than I can possibly use. And rather than writing down an outline or a plot or anything so organized, I just begin to write. Now, I work hard on the first chapter to make sure that my springboard has resilience, and then I just write the way you read, 1 page at a time, and I inform myself as to how we're going to proceed just on the energy of what I've just finished writing. So it sort of tells itself. And once that manuscript is done, I rewrite. And rewrite in the early days meant cut, 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 cut. So I would write 450 pages and bring it down to 280. Because we all say everything several times, as we all know, being now recipients of texts and emails, which instantly put us into a nod. Because you say it once, and then you say it again, and then you say it a third time, just like I'm saying the same thing now, several times. It's a habit. We're probably trained to do it in school in a way. Start with an introduction, then develop your theme, then conclude. Well, what have you done? You've said the same thing 3 times. So I had to learn to break that academic habit and learn, in fact, to say it once, say it well, trust your reader, and move on. So this is a kind of an intelligence consortium that we have going. I tell a good part of the story, but your creativity and imagination fill in more gaps than you know. And I'll prove it to you, because I'll ask for a show of hands. Those of you who have been so lost in the telling of a tale in this context, whereby you've forgotten that your children needed feeding, that your laundry needed drying, that, in other words, you get so lost in the fictional dream that you forget you're turning pages, right? Everybody? I should ask has that never happened to somebody? And maybe one hand goes up, but that's why we read. We want to go into this magical, mystical world. But it doesn't exclusively come from this. It comes from here. because we're all more or less frustrated storytellers. I may be more frustrated than you, in fact, because I've got 6,000 books in my head. But we all love to be invited into a story and then to supply, oh, I know what that smells like. Oh, I can visualize that color. Oh, I can see what that looks like, because people like me learn to just put out half a description and then trust you guys to fill in the blanks. And so it works. So I, for example, have a major character. I actually have no idea if anybody in this room even knows who I am, much less who my characters are. But the head guy is named Joe Gunther, who is a man of, shall we say, indescribable age. I kept writing and writing and writing, and when I began, he was middle-aged. So he's about 90 now. But he is spry, by God, and looking at the hair color, all you guys with really bad Grecian formula, you know, including me, will discover that you are, in fact, as young as you feel, and this guy feels very, very sporty. But he has been invaluable for me in many ways, and one of the ways is that halfway through the series, he was a first-person narrator. So all the books where Joe had to be on stage, Joe had to observe and tell us everything. Now that was sort of important to me as I was formulating the series in my head back in those salad years of 1988. But about book 16 or 17 or something like that, I realized that I had created more than just Joe Gunther. I had created a whole family of some seriously eccentric people in some cases. There's a guy named Willie Kunkel in this series that everybody loves to love, although he is one of the most dysfunctional human beings you'll ever meet. My daughter says that he's based on me, actually, but we won't go there. So Joe Gunther began to become so surrounded by interesting, creaky, cranky, quirky guys that I needed to find a way to give them stage space. And so we switched in The Sniper's Wife about halfway through. Is like, if I keep writing, it'll be halfway through. And now it's their third-person narratives. Well, long story short, as if I knew what I was talking about, because of all this research, eventually got approached by the very people I was interviewing, who said, you know, you've been at this now for ungodly years. We, the cops or the medical examiner's office or whatnot, are actually read a couple of your books that we managed to steal, because who wants to buy them? And we're discovering that you actually did what you swore on a stack of Bibles you would do, which is I wouldn't lie about the research. So if I went to law enforcement and I asked them, how do you do such and such and such? They would say, well, we do it this way, but we can't do it that way. Well, then I wouldn't do it that way. Now, I might push the envelope ever slightly, but I wouldn't push it to the realm of impossibility. And as a result, they began to realize, oh my God, he's actually writing about us. So they finally, in the form of a sergeant, patrol sergeant from Bells Falls, came up and said, well, you may know a whole lot more about local law enforcement than a good many of the guys who work for me. Would you like to become a cop? Now, I was already a death investigator for the medical examiner's office because they had said more or less kind of the same thing. In fact, the chief medical examiner called me at home and said, we've just changed the system and are hiring investigators who are not doctors. Where are you? Which was kind of a wonderful invitation, so I didn't hesitate too long to sign up there. And I did the same thing because with the cops, because I looked at this very young man who is now a federal agent and with whom I had dinner just last week or a week before. And I said, do you know how old I am? Now, his response, I still presume to be one of the most clever, subversive exemplars of geriatric abuse that I've ever heard. because he said, that's exactly why we're offering you the job. And that to me is subversion through and through. I'm sorry, but he had me right there. Boom, you know, oh, I'll follow you anywhere. So I signed up, you know, gray hair old coot. And this was sort of old school because it is Vermont after all, and they basically gave me a gun and the keys and said, there's the neighborhood. And it was about that complicated, and that allowed me, needless to say, this proximity to what I had already been writing about. So I wanted to keep going in this series of books rather than, because as you can see now, it's all so autobiographical and it feeds so intensely into my needs and my curiosities that to write some sort of terrorist thriller or whatever these guys are advertising just seemed wrong. I mean, I may have my cynical streak, don't get me wrong, but it's not that fundamental. I won't write against my own intellectual integrity, if you will. So yes, I understand that these are murder mysteries. Okay, I know that no Scandinavian is staying awake at night trying to figure out how to get me the Nobel Prize for Literature. Okay, but I made a pledge very early on, and that is that whatever you may call this genre, I will nevertheless do what I can to make it the best that I can possibly make. So actually Margot and I were comparing notes the other day because this is a process, very mechanical in some ways. We've talked about the artsy-artsy aspects of it, but there's also just hands-on, the editing, the cutting, the figuring out, the balancing. You need to actually put on a sort of technocrat hat and figure out that, in fact, all slots A do indeed fit slots B. You know. Otherwise, your readers are going to interrupt that fictional daydream and go, what? And you never want that to happen. This has got to be a seamless dream sequence. So that takes a lot of sweat, actually, Esther Williams notwithstanding, because she was working in water after all, and I'm not. So you can see me sweat. And I will edit these books, which are about 300 pages long, up to 20 times. So when someone asks me, you know, what this book is like, or what's my favorite book, or any reasonable question like that, I can honestly tell you that I have no frigging clue. Because my experience with these books is completely different, I hope, from your experience. Because this is all very hard work. The idea is for me to exert that kind of labor so that for you, the experience is seamless. So that's the ambition. And it's fun. I mean, it's kind of like putting together a complex piece of machinery so that the recipient can then go, whoa, it's like you can't feel anything. You go, yes, gotcha. You know, that's a good feeling. And it's addictive. I do this because it is my job, which is unusual in this country. There are only about 5% of writers who actually make a living at this. But that also means I get to share the same elevator with Stephen King. So, you know, that's kind of cool. Of course, he won't even let me carry his lunch, but that's all right. We're still in the same category. But I think, you know, I'm sort of stuck on this. Good thing since, what did I say, 1975? How many years ago is that? I've been killing trees for a long time. No wonder Joe Gunther's so old. And it's gotten to be a habit. It's how I express myself. And I've actually come to understand, and this may go again to my conflict with my colleagues telling me to go out there and write rip-snorting bestsellers. I've come to understand that this is my music. That my words are kind of like anyone else grabbing a guitar or a violin. This comes alive in my head, and when I'm doing the editing, not only am I figuring out slots and tabs and whatnot, but also at some point in the editing process, I'm just listening to it. And the nice thing is every once in a blue moon, I'm actually asked to read something out loud. And early on when this happened, egocentric fellow that I am, I would read a passage and think to myself, wow, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's a kick in the pants when you get to serve, because some of these books are written so long ago, you've completely lost memory of what they were like. And it is, in fact, at that point, like reading someone else's work. And that's as close as I've ever been able to get to your experience of reading these from the outside in. I should tell you, you notice that I have not been referring to a cheat sheet or notes, because I just fly at these things like I do when I write them. That means that you guys are going to be called to task, because I don't know how this was advertised, but it had better been advertised as a conversation, a back and forth. So I'm expecting some questions here, otherwise we're all going to just stop dead in our tracks and stare at each other for a long time. I should say one last thing, and that is that, believe it or not, even though I just came from woodchuck land, I've already got two old buddies in the audience who approached me, which is really neat. One from my law enforcement past. John is standing there hoping I didn't identify him. Worked in the crime lab back in the days when I used to pick every brains, including his, about, why do things get done the way they get done. And Richard in the corner over here, who represents a rather weird aspect of my background. It has nothing to do with any of this, except that I come from a long line of writers. And one writer was my grandfather, Alfred Goldsboro Mayer, who was responsible for a lot of writing and research and homework and associations that are now intricately tied into Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. He was a marine biologist, and his father-in-law, Alpheus Hyatt, was sort of had a major role in making the marine biological laboratory aspect of Woods Hole come alive, unless I'm wrong.
Right, and he worked for Alexander Agassiz.
Well, shows you had a man of good taste then, because I've heard a lot about Agassiz. A more towering egomaniac was harder to imagine. So it's fun in a way. I'm sort of back home in that bizarre New England fashion. So, okay. So enough of that advertising about the old sod. Who's got a question for me? Well, good Lord, you could have hesitated a little bit.
No, I love the way you wrote about the floods after Hurricane Irene.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And I was wondering what your personal experiences were.
Well, actually pretty interesting, because I'm sort of semi-retired as a cop now, mostly because I'm old enough to be everyone else's father. But back then I was still alive and well. Unlike now, and I was running a special unit in Windham County. We call it the SIU Special Investigations Unit, and it's tasked, among other things, with crimes against kids. Now, 90% of those are sex crimes, just because we're the kind of species we are, and we do disgusting things to each other, and that's just, one hopes a minor aspect of our personality, but it's what we do, and it was what I was assigned to pursue and to set right. So any crime involving a kid, I'd get the call for the entirety of the county. That was my beat. And on the reins of that, what everyone called a tropical storm, which is not what we got hit with, but call it what you will, Irene began early Sunday morning and basically poured all day long. And by Monday morning, it was a cobalt blue sky, beautiful, and if all you did was keep your eye on the sky and the tops of the trees, it was just a calendar Vermont day. And as soon as you dropped your sight a little lower, then you realized that we had a wicked amount of work to do. On that Sunday, I got called because a young man, a teenager, therefore in my purview, had gone missing, and we didn't know what had happened to him. And so I'm out there getting really wet really fast, to the point where I didn't even worry about what I was wearing at this point, because I was going to be drier on the outside than on the inside, just wringing out. And we looked for this young guy. We still haven't found him. He's gone. And so that's an open case that I suspect if it ever gets solved, it'll be probably, skeletal remains, in which case I'll be called from my other capacity as a death investigator. But at that point, it was just a juvenile crime. And so I spent all day long outside, involved and interacting with some very interesting permutations, some of which I visit in the book and some of which I don't. But that was a perfect example of being able to describe from the field what it felt like and looked like, smelled like, and all that, without breaking what is to me a cardinal rule, and that is you never, ever, ever bring a real case into my fiction. I deem that unethical. It ain't going to happen. But if I don't bring what I see and smell and sense, and I'd be an idiot. I hope I'm not one of them. So that's what I brought to that book, Three Can Keep a Secret. The first half of which is very soggy, because I bring to bear a lot of what the feelings were, and of course I made up the actual actions I described there, but I saw a lot of variations of what I describe in the book. It was, dare I say, an exciting day, and to me filled with a certain pathos because of the realities that I was engaged in. And this kid just, who knows where he went. Big family, too, so a lot of people hurting out there. And of course, I visit that as a death investigator. I've probably done about, I don't know, you stop counting, but roughly 500 cases in my career so far. You see a lot of misery. I mean, no one wants to see me come. But there I am, and the only reason I get called is because people can't explain the finer details of what happened. If it's straight up and narrow, your doctor has said, you have a terminal disease and you're going to die, and you die, they don't call me. That's not a mystery. They call me when you're just found in your home and everyone's going, oh my God, whatever happened to Bert? Or whatever your name is. So it's a wonderful opportunity for me to absorb and then to translate. It's probably not bad for my mindset too. Otherwise, I might be a gloomy Gus given all the bad stuff I see. Yes, ma'am.
I just finished reading this book called Falmouth about a bunch of weird people that are trying to work to match unidentified remains with missing people that have never been found.
Yeah.
By doing database work and all kinds of things like that. Have you ever gotten that?
Yeah, oh sure. No, that's very much alive and well. There are special units in most states that do that. New Hampshire has one up and running that's actually sort of a separate unit. Vermont has guys that are that's a major part of their assignment, although they do other stuff because there are only 12 people in Vermont, so we all have to sort of double duty, Specialists aren't really allowed. so we do various things, but yeah, we have a unit that does that with the state police. And some of the municipals as well. It's amazing how many of those open cold cases there are. Vermont, for example, has a homicide rate that would make someone in, let's say, Bronx burst out laughing, because they rack up the same numbers within a 20-minute period. But nevertheless, you're still going to get these floating questions like my young man, and what do you do with that? And then, of course, I'll get called. We found a bone. And so I have to hold that up to the light and take a look at it, and then I can sometimes easily dismiss it, but if it's certain bare bones, and that is BEAR, actually look quite human. So in some of these cases, depending on how much evidence is laid about and whatnot, I'll have to bring it up to the lab. We'll get a consulting for a forensic anthropologist, and I've worked with all these folks in some of these cases to settle these things. But then, I mean, if it is a human skull, there's no doubt about what that is. But the big question is, indeed, as you implied, who is it? And that can be quite challenging. On TV, it's just DNA and X-rays. Okay, so now you got DNA and X-rays. So what? You got to compare it to something. And just because someone went missing, like this young man, do we have DNA on this young man? Well, no, not really. I mean, we could get mitochondrial DNA from the mom. I mean, there's stuff you can do, but you don't just do that willy-nilly. The other thing the movies keep forgetting is this is wicked expensive stuff. And you can't just rush off. And I always love these guys. Get a warrant. Boom. No. No, that's not how it works, I mean, I've actually sidled up to judges who are standing in front of a urinal and said, Judge, I know you're busy, but you sign right here. I mean, you got to do what you got to do. And it's, and actually, I find that more interesting and entertaining than what they do on TV. But that's just me. I'm a little perverse. Yes?
Has Joe ever been approached to star in his own TV series?
God, don't I wish. Is this an offer? Catch this. I want this woman's name. Yes, it has come up. It's more or less farcical sometimes. It's really like, I've got a barn. Do you have costumes? No, I don't think so. But sometimes it's come very close and heartbreaking to the kind. In fact, there was this war story here, more years ago than I care to remember. There was this guy, producer, got all the players together, got backers and all this, actually using the H word, Hollywood, and they're meeting in this big office building, and I'm sitting there in Vermont, the phone nearby, and by God, it rings. I pick it up, and it's this guy, and he's crying. He's weeping on the phone. This is not a good sign. I put that much together. And he said that there were 8 guys that were supposed to come to this meeting, and there was a contract, there was a view out the window. I mean, it was all the right stuff. And something like the 4th guy comes in, or whatever number he was, and he sees the first guy, and he said, I hope this is, well, you can bleep this later. He says, "You son of a bitch." I said it sort of slurry, so maybe no one understood what I said. So, you screwed me over on that deal 5 years ago when we were going to do Debbie Does Detroit, and so this is my opportunity. The hell with you. He turned on his heel and he walked out the door. Well, I'm chopped liver here. What did I have anything to do with this? But that was the way that deal went down. So it's a tricky business, and it's filled with very quirky human beings, and they march, well, some of them, to very different drummers than rational people might think. So, no is the answer to your question. Nothing's happened yet. However, Margot, who will not take the word no lightly, has decided that we ought to roll up our sleeves, and if they ain't going to do it for us, maybe we can figure out a way to do it for ourselves. So we're starting to assemble a small team of people to see if we can build a sellable package.
Well, Joan O'Brien would be able to play on.
We're going bigger than that. This is about the money, honey. The old idea of, oh gosh, this would be really good, make me feel good. I don't care how I feel anymore. I want to retire at some point, or at least have enough money to think I can. I mean, that secondhand pickup truck is not for show. Okay. So that's the weird part, is if you've made the choices that I've made, which is to follow my muse, my poor paying muse, then you better be pretty practical. And at this point, the reference was to a Vermont filmmaker, sweetheart of a guy, nifty little movies, no bucks. I want the bucks. You know, so if Whoopi Goldberg calls up and says she wants to turn Joe into light Italian opera, deal. If the price is right, I got to be a pragmatist here. So, and in fact, funnily enough, that's the other thing that we're looking at audio game. We're looking at computer games and audio projects and theatrical ideas and this movie concept, and we must have, I don't know, I'm probably talking too much here, but we must have like 7 different projects of one form or another. And as organized and cutthroat, competitive, and capitalistic as that sounds, we're basically shoving as much spaghetti as we can against that wall. And if one of these projects sticks, then that's where we'll go.
Fortunately, Tom Selleck is in Moobla, so they have to wait.
He's gotten way too fat anyhow, so I got standards here after all. But that's right. Plus that mustache thing, it's just like I think that the obvious Joe Gunther actor is Danny DeVito. What? Who else had a question? Yes.
This is in the nature of a testimonial. Keep doing what you do.
Well, I will.
Next week, my son Peter lives in Essex Junction. And when he moved to Vermont, I said I would like to give you a book that talks about the people in Vermont. And as you said earlier, and I think you're right on target, that's what you do. So I looked here, number 7, the Ragman's Memory, first one. Now, the family tradition. My son, each Christmas, gives me your latest book. I have never looked at the book.
Excellent. And do you think that timing is like made up? I don't think so.
My book is right on it.
There you go.
I'm going to wait till...
Excellent. You're a good man, sir. Checks in the mail. Finder's fee and all that.
After he's done with it, it's usually the next Friday or something.
So you really want to do a cruel joke, you rip out the last page.
Not from the source.
No, I love hearing that. I mean, it's great fun because and it does bring to mind an encounter I had with my New York publishers. I've gone through quite a few of them. They usually go out of business. Not my fault. But previous to these guys, this is Macmillan, or I don't know, they call themselves something else, but it's, yeah, thank you. So it's owned by Macmillan or some M word, but their predecessor, many years ago, said, well, this pre-Christmas thing, the thing you just told us about, I mean, everybody publishes at Christmas. I mean, it's such a traffic jam. It's probably not a good idea. If you really want to stand out, you should publish around May. And I'm just thinking to myself, but of course I don't think quietly. So there I was on the phone with this idiot, and I said, there's only one time of the year that a Vermonter separates him or herself from $25 for a murder mystery, and it ain't mud season. There's dead silence, like, what season? But the point was taken. So they published the bloody book. I refuse to remember what title it was. In May, the hardback tanked. And they've been publishing Christmas or before Christmas ever since. So, yeah. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. Who else? Yes, ma'am.
Carolyn Barber, what did you get? The governor.
Oh, yes. I had a, it's just a sort of here's the word part. You're going to have to help me out a little. People are always saying, what about this character, that character? I have no idea what you're talking about. In the mental institution. My God, I remember that. Okay, that's good. Good. 2 points for me. Usually I have to turn to Margaret and say, what was the name of that book? But this was, in fact, free can keep a secret. What happened was that there is, as is so often the case in Vermont, one of whatever. In this case, it was a mental institution. There's probably a more PC term for that, so just fill in the blanks. But it's called the Vermont State Hospital, or was, and it was located in Waterbury in the sort of reconfabulated ancient complex that used to in fact be, in capital letters, the Vermont State Hospital. The Vermont State Hospital used to have 1,800 patients in it. It was a minor city in and of itself. Well, times change. And certainly in the 1970s, all these institutions got cleaned out in a rather unceremonious fashion. A lot of them just sort of said, okay, you're free, and they wandered out, which explains why there, for the 13 people in Vermont, 12 of them are shrinks. So she was a case in point in the context of the book, where she was confined to this place forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, which actually doesn't happen in the modern Vermont State Hospital. But that's a case where this is fiction. I'm allowed to wrinkle a few things. The source of all that information was a very good friend of mine with whom I was an EMT back in the ancient years when I used to do that for 25 years. And she was currently, at the time of the storm, a nurse at the Vermont State Hospital. The waters jumped their embankment, and with the foresight that one usually gives to state bureaucrats, they had put the campus of this erstwhile 1,800 person campus in a floodplain. So guess what happened to the plane during the storm? In the middle of the night, just a tidal wave of water jumped from the banks of the Winooski River and took over this vast campus. And right there in its path was the remnants of the Vermont State Hospital, which were now only 50 patients. And she described to me in telling detail that entire night. So not only that, but I went and visited the campus because I'm a very nosy guy, can't resist crawling into a tunnel. That's where I lose Margot, by the way. She doesn't do tunnels. But so I went to the old campus, which now is actually, as ironies or not would have it, the headquarters of public safety is on that same campus. But they were just slightly higher enough that they kept most of their feet dry. It took out all the computer servers, but the building was more or less complete. But not so lucky for the state hospital, which drowned up to the floor of the second floor. So that really went under. Well, as you may or may not know, there's a little architectural quirk, especially in the northeast of this country. All these state hospitals are built on a honeycomb of underground passages. It reflects the old days of not seen and not heard. Okay, so we know that basically, great Aunt Sally, from whom you wanted the old family house, you just got rid of Sally and put her in the nut house, and that was so. But you don't want to remind yourself of the tacky way that you inherited the house. So basically, once you've given Sally to the institution, she vanishes from view. Why? Because every time she's asked to go from one building or is escorted from one building to another, they go underground. Well, then later on, they had steam tunnels, electricity, plumbing, modern conveniences were invented, and they were all run through the same thing. That's why oftentimes they're referred to euphemistically as steam tunnels. Well, I don't know, there's no steam in the tunnel, and you can usually stand up in them, so it does seem a little odd until you dig into it a little bit. Or in my case, go and visit it. So I went to Waterbury, and I began to climb around all these tunnels. Well, they're vast and many, and they go very far. And guess what happens when water invades such a setting? It goes into the tunnels too. So that's how this campus first got flooded, was coming up through the tunnels into the buildings, which is really creepy when you consider that because of the passage of time and overcrowding and multiple usage and whatnot, all these buildings being employed for other purposes than originally designed, now the tunnels are filled with offices. Did I mention that the water went up to the second floor? If you're in a tunnel, you're way below that. So it was a mess. There were a lot of people scrambling around, a lot of very scared, wet people. And I wanted to bring that to bear. On top of it all, since I'm naturally perverse, I happen to know from my nurse friend that in fact they confronted adversity successfully. They handed out flashlights, they put toilet paper in their ears when the alarm system malfunctioned because it got shorted out, and howled in a state hospital for something like 6 hours. I don't know about you, but that would make me nutty. So all this was actually occurring, and yet they didn't lose a single patient. Everybody got together. You know, the patients and the staff cooperated and worked wonderfully well. Not in my world. I let her get away. And she just wanders off. But she goes missing. And that's one of the kernels, of which there are several, in that particular book. Where did she go? How did she get out? Where is she? Will we find her? And of course that brings us back to my case. But you can see why even a fellow investigator who worked with my case with me wouldn't recognize that I've kind of stolen and changed a few things around and infiltrated it into the story. So that's kind of how I get that done. And that's where Barbara came from. Also, I was trained, after all, and worked as a historian. So Barbara has a background. She's been there for a lot of years. I had to figure out why she ended up in that facility. And it has a political background. It has a historical background. It allowed me to go back into the history of Vermont, which I find fascinating, and to make that part of the plot as well. I have a very crowded head. You wouldn't believe the things that don't get into the books. Yes, ma'am. Gluttons for punishment. Oh yeah, good Lord. Are you kidding? They threw a Joe Gunther weekend once. I mean, I live in Vermont for good reason. I fit right in. This is definitely a nut house in and of itself, and I'm a prime example of that. No, the Chamber of Commerce decided that they would put together a Mad About Mysteries weekend, I think they called it. It was a long time ago. And I said, you guys are nuts. This is a really bad idea. No one's going to show up, because I tend to be a little bit self-deprecating. Margot reminds me. And you're going to throw a party and you're going to die of loneliness. Well, they threw a party and everyone showed up. They had a wonderful time. They had actors reenacting the characters. So the Willie Kunkel guy was, of course, naturally the guy I kept my eye on. And the actor kept forgetting which arm is dysfunctional. Just reaching out with the wrong arm, going, no, I don't, well, never mind. So they were wandering around the streets pretending to solve a crime, and they had plastic bones, so to speak, the devil, and holding up this who's this belong to kind of thing. Well, the guy who was Joe Gunther got a little carried away. So he wandered free from script, because he saw himself as a really professional actor, and confronted tourists who were just walking up and down the street, and he began grilling them right there on the spot. Where were you on the night of, So it got a little oblique as to exactly what the hell was going on. The real cops started getting complaints about this weirdo out there. It was a weird weekend, but they pulled it off, and all was very successful. And someone said, well, gosh, I mean, that was such a hit, maybe we should do it again. And they never did. So I think like my writing, you do it once, you do it well, and you leave it alone. So, what's that? No, thankfully not on that weekend. Yeah, exactly. No, we saved them for a different week. Maybe they found one and went, no, later. But it was a fun weekend. I was actually a patrol officer in Bellows Falls. And Bellows Falls, statistically in Vermont, has got some of the worst crime figures in the state on a per capita basis. This is a tiny village; it's only a square mile, but it's kind of a training ground for the aberrant. And so being a cop there is terrific, because you talk about a crash course. I mean, you just really learn your stuff because there are very few in uniform, and they've got to know how to do everything very quickly. So it was a wonderful place for me to work. But of course, these books were being produced, so a lot of people knew the name. And I discovered that there was a kind of odd body language that was going on, and that is, if I pulled someone over, and it falls under the officer discretion. You've all had that. I'm quite sure you've all had that, where you get pulled over and the guy says, registration, proof of insurance, all that stuff. And then there's a little bit of a conversation. You don't necessarily get a ticket. I mean, that's the officer discretion thing. That's why all you ladies certainly, officer. I have had that before. I mean, I've even been offered donuts, for God's sake. But on this occasion, so what I was thinking of a special occasion, but I'll go back to the general theme, and that is that what I began to pick up on was that if, as a result of that conversation, I just gave them a warning, they all complimented me on the books. Love the books. Thank you for the book. But if I gave them a ticket, I never got that compliment. Except once. So this van goes by at Mach 1, which I don't know about you, but that's illegal everywhere. And after my cruiser stopped spinning around from its hiding place, I went into pursuit, lit her up, pulled her over. And this woman, really grouchy, she's all alone in that. So I said, so we're going to talk a ticket here. So I'm doing the preliminary conversation. But she's so ticked off, there's no love lost here. So I'm figuring, wow, it's going to result in tickets. There's no way about it. So I go back to the cruiser, I fill out all the paperwork, I bring it back, and I lay the paper on her. Well, of course, mega attitudinal. So she's going to, proofread my penmanship. I don't know why people all sort of look at the ticket, okay, knock your socks off, that's fine. But she looks up, eyeballs my name tag, and says, and I could actually sort of pretend this was a foreign language because she was from Massachusetts. Says, oh my God, you're Archie Mayer. I thought, for a moment I could maybe deny that, because that's actually not what my mother calls me, but I owned up to it. And so she was actually all of a sudden all smiles, delighted, read all the books. That was, it was a love fest. So that was a head shaker. Went back, she went her way, I went mine, and never saw her again until 2 years later. I go into this relatively new restaurant, about 2 years old, and I order a sandwich. And I'm not sort of making any eye contact, I'm not looking, I'm just sort of doing whatever, and the sandwich comes across, and this woman says, that'll be $168. So I look up, and she's standing there and says, that's what you charged me. Everyone's a critic, Sir.
How did you come up with the title?
Which title? Any title.
Keep a secret.
You know, that actually came from our, what's Lulu to us, grandchild? I can't keep it straight. We got 7 of them, so I'm allowed to screw them up. She actually, there was, what was that, some TV Pretty Little Liars. This is not a show I recommend, by the way. You know, by the theme song enough is bad enough to drive any adult out of the room. But this is a 17-year-old girl. She's totally addicted to the show. And part of the theme song or something invokes two can keep a secret if one of them is dead. Well, for someone in my business and with my general outlook on life, that's pretty irresistible. Okay, but my daughter is a master's of library science person, so she loves digging into. She lives in Philadelphia, and there was something wrong with the quote. It just sort of hung in my head slightly. 2 can keep a secret if one of them is dead. There was something off. So I contacted Elizabeth and I said, got an assignment for you. And Elizabeth and I work on this. She's played a role in other titles. Good researcher. And I said, check this out for me. There's something slightly off. And in no time flat, I get a return email. And it's got attachments and photos and facsimiles and whatnot. And in the 1784 Poor Richard's Almanac, you know, our friend Ben Franklin, chapter and verse, it's cited and footnoted. There it is. 3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. That's what he said. But this TV show changed it around ever so slightly because, hey, 3 is too high a number, I guess. It simplified it. But so I paid homage to our granddaughter, but to also just the accuracy of the Ben Franklin quote. So I throw that in, and I think I thanked my daughter for doing the homework, but Lulu as well. Lulu is actually, my author photos are taken by Lulu, who's the 17-year-old. So the titles either come to me way ahead of time. Fruits of the Poisonous Tree it's just a legal phrase. Cops use it periodically, especially when search warrant time comes around, because they don't want to screw it up, because if you don't do one properly or if you don't do one at all and you grab evidence that's deemed fruits of the poisonous tree, it's inadmissible in court later. So that's a phrase we all sort of have hanging in our head. Well, for a literary type, that's just too good to ignore, right? So I had that in my head, and it wasn't until 2-3 books down the line that I came with a plot that worked with this title. So that's easy. Other books, I just can't get it. And so I've learned not to fret. So Proof Positive, for example, which is a title I'm fine with, but it didn't come until very, very late in the book. And it plays a little bit, one of my 36 previous jobs was as a photographer. I used to, back in the old days, film. Does anyone remember film? Yeah, okay, well that's how I was trained. And a positive proof was an aspect of photography, just a way of checking your work. Well, so Proof Positive, play on words because of the murder mystery aspect. There you go. And on down the line, some of these had more or less, I already referred to Open Season, which was the only title that I actually had nothing to do with. My title was The Stalking Horse, which is a hunting term. And the whole principle behind the book was that the bad guy set up the police department to reopen a case. He stimulated the police department to look at an old case that they deemed closed. They reopened it because of the sort of the irritation that he applied from an outside force. So it was sort of an intriguing example of that old hunting term where you use an empty horse, and if you're a hunter, you hide behind the horse and you move the horse towards the prey. Well, the prey can't count. Can't figure out that the horse has 6 legs. So I'm sitting there going this, and all of a sudden the rifle comes over the pommel of the saddle, and boom, that's it, your dinner. So I love that title. Unfortunately, there was a book that was good from some other publisher that was being published about 2 months before my book was slated to come out, and that was the end of that title, and the publishers just came up with their own. And on down the line. Sometimes, 26 titles later, some of these things just drive you crazy. But most of the time, it sort of takes care of itself. I know that when I submit the manuscript, I'll probably have a title that will work. Some of them I like, and all my readers say, "Were you drinking?" And one of them is The Second Mouse. So, again, I blame my daughter. So she calls me up and sends me, actually it was an email in those days, she sent me an email and it said, "Dad, you ever see this bumper sticker?" It says, "The early bird may get the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese." Now, the more to think about that, the darker and darker it gets. So this is truly my daughter. That's why I love this girl. She and I definitely walk these gloomy shoals together. So what, you think I was not going to use that? So I had this plot, and it sort of worked, where this one guy sets up another guy, so it's the second mouse gets the cheese. It made sense to me. Well, all you dim bulbs out there, I can't explain it, but I got more emails and notes and messages from people saying, "Love the book. That was one of your better, but really enjoyed the book. But what's the title? Who's the second mouse?" Yeah. So every once in a while, they're a little less clear than they might be.
Can we take one more question?
One more. That guarantees dead silence. Who's going to stick up their hand? Oh,
Do you
yes.
have a favorite author that you read?
Oh, good Lord, no. No, I have so many authors I so thoroughly enjoy that I'd sell them all short shrift if I identified a certain one. But here is the sad truth, as I mentioned, thankfully, full disclosure, I don't read murder mysteries at all anymore. I used to, and so my sources, my influences were sort of unsurprisingly people like Chandler and Hammett and maybe a little more rarely known would be Ken Miller. What was his fake name was Ross McDonald. That was his pen name. Kenneth Miller was his real name. Those guys were people that I enjoyed hearing in my head when I was reading those kinds of books. Now I read history books. It drives Margot crazy. I always come to bed with these 1,000-page tomes. The whole bed goes, "Oh, you enjoying your reading?" It's really nerdy stuff, but that's where I escape to. And in all honesty, in my own defense, look what I do. 25 years of firefighting EMS, currently a cop who does sex crimes against kids, death investigator of 500 bodies to his calling and still alive and well in and of himself. I'm going to curl up with a murder mystery? Even I'm not that dark, so I need a break, and so I go to history books, which one could claim are hardly brighter. Thank you very much.